Hi there, I'm Maura. I thought moving into my first home would be the beginning of peace, but my parents had other plans. They told my sister to take my house because, according to them, I didn't have a real family. I stayed quiet until I started recording everything. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you from your life? Are you listening to this late at night or in the middle of your day? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I would love to hear your story. The air smelled of rain and fallen leaves the day I moved into my little house on the corner of Sycamore Lane. Louisville in early autumn was soft and muted, a gentle mist clinging to the trees like a half-remembered dream. I parked my old sedan in the driveway, hands trembling slightly as I turned off the ignition. For the first time in a long time, the silence that greeted me wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Boxes littered the small living room, a haphazard collection of survival and hope. I let out a slow breath, pressing my palm against the cool beige wall, grounding myself in this fragile beginning. I wanted to believe it could stay like this, simple and mine. But deep down, a splinter of old fear twisted in my gut, a leftover wound from years of learning that nothing I built was ever really safe. Without thinking, I unpacked the small recording devices I'd bought months ago. Tiny black rectangles, unassuming, easy to miss. I placed them strategically, in the hallway, the kitchen, near the front door. Cameras, too, tucked carefully into corners. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. After everything I'd endured, trust wasn't a luxury I could afford anymore. If anything happened, when it happened, I would have the truth, captured and undeniable. A few days passed with nothing but the hum of the heater and the quiet creaks of settling wood for company. I allowed myself the smallest measure of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Then, one morning, I found the envelope. It was thick, damp, and shoved halfway under my front door, the paper curling at the edges from the early morning dew. I bent down slowly, dread pooling low in my stomach before I even touched it. When I opened it, a stack of documents slipped out, official-looking, neatly printed. At the bottom of each page was my name, or rather, a clumsy imitation of it. Someone had forged my signature on property transfer forms. The house, the first thing I'd ever had that was truly mine, was being stolen from beneath me with ink and lies. For a long moment, I simply stood there in my front hallway staring at the pages as if they would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But they didn't. The betrayal was raw, but it wasn't surprising. I had learned long ago that family could smile at you even as they slipped the knife between your ribs. I locked the door behind me with shaking hands. Memories bled into the edges of my vision. The birthdays spent watching others blow out candles, the holidays where my chair was always at the far end of the table, the constant reminders that without a husband, without children, I was somehow less, an extra, a mistake. They had never seen me as family, only as something useful, and now something disposable. I dropped the forged documents onto the kitchen table. They landed with a soft, accusing thud against the wood. I stared at them, not moving, the weight of what they represented pressing down on my chest. Then slowly I crouched beneath the counter and retrieved the recorder I had hidden there. I flicked it on, the tiny red light blinking to life in the dim kitchen. I would keep it running. All of them. Always. If they were coming for me, they wouldn't find the girl they used to trample. They would find something different. I stopped counting the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, the forged documents lying open on the nightstand beside me like a quiet accusation. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel their weight pressing against my chest. I told myself maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe I was being too suspicious, reading betrayal where there was none. But in the hollow of my stomach, the unease grew heavier by the hour. One afternoon, while cleaning out a box of old keepsakes from my closet, I found it. The pen, a cheap black ballpoint worn smooth from years of use. I picked it up instinctively, twirling it between my fingers, and froze. I knew this pen. It was Beverly's. She used it to write every check, sign every card. My heart sank. A quick test on a scrap of paper confirmed it. The ink matched the one on the forged documents almost perfectly. The room tilted for a second, and I had to sit down on the floor, the box of memories forgotten at my feet. This wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't a prank. It was personal. It was deliberate. Somewhere along the way, the people who were supposed to love me had decided I was expendable. When Beverly called that evening, her voice was sugar-coated as always, inviting me over for just a simple family dinner. I knew better, but some stubborn part of me needed to see it for myself, needed to be sure. So I went. The house smelled like roast chicken and freshly baked bread, the kind of smells that should have felt like home. But the air was wrong, too thick, too sweet. Darlene and Keith were already seated at the table, their smiles tight and rehearsed. I sat down, my skin prickling under their gazes. The meal passed in a haze of small talk, each word a weight pressing harder on my chest. Then, after dessert, Beverly produced a manila envelope. "We were thinking," she said gently, almost apologetically, "that maybe you could help Darlene's family out a little, just temporarily, for the kids' sake." Inside the envelope was a temporary guardianship agreement. I didn't even need to read it to know what it really was. A slow, calculated attempt to erode my rights, my home, my life. I smiled somehow. I tucked the envelope neatly back inside and slid it across the table. "I'll think about it," I lied. Beverly's expression faltered for just a split second, the mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. Darlene looked away, her hands clenching in her lap. Keith avoided my eyes entirely. The drive home felt longer than it was. The chill in the night air seeped into my bones, matching the growing frost inside my heart. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, even as the truth crystallized in my mind. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a declaration of war. Later that night, I sat at my desk, laying the forged documents side by side with the pen that had betrayed me. I stared at them until the edges blurred. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. I replayed that night at the dinner table like an old, scratched record I couldn't turn off. Every too bright smile, every loaded word disguised as concern gnawed at me. I saw it now for what it was, a performance. And I had been the only one who hadn't known my role. Their messages started changing. Darlene's texts were overly sweet, dripping with fake warmth. Beverly dropped casual hints about support documents again, her tone light, almost sing-song like she was discussing cookie recipes instead of my future. The walls around me, once solid, felt like they were beginning to breathe, to close in. One evening, alone in the kitchen with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator for company, I retrieved the hidden recorder. Sitting at the table, I pressed play and listened. My breath caught when I heard Beverly's voice, smooth as silk, coaching Darlene. "If she tries to fight it, just cry," Beverly said calmly. "Play the victim. No one questions a mother fighting for her kids." My hand tightened around the device, nails digging into my palm. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't me being paranoid or bitter. They had planned this, coldly, strategically, like I was a piece of property to be negotiated and seized. I tucked the recorder away and promised myself they would not see me crumble. The following Friday, I came home late after picking up extra shifts. My body ached for rest, but as I pushed open the front door, the smell hit me first. Detergent, plastic, the faint sugary tang of children's cereal. Boxes lined the hallway. Not mine. Children's toys spilled out of a cracked box labeled kitchen stuff. A pink booster seat leaned against the wall. Bags of clothes slumped near the stairwell. I stood frozen, staring at the evidence of an invasion carried out without noise, without permission. Darlene had begun moving into my home like it was already hers. The betrayal slithered under my skin, hot and alive. I kicked off my shoes and stumbled into the living room, heart pounding. On the couch sat a plush bear I didn't recognize, wearing a crooked smile. I picked it up, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline, and sank onto the cold kitchen floor. The walls seemed to lean closer, crowding me. Memory after memory flooded in. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to, whispered jokes I wasn't meant to hear, the way my name always sounded like an afterthought. I pressed the bear's plastic nose into my forehead and breathed slowly, willing the rage back into its cage. The rage didn't leave. Later, under the faint light of the porch, I carried every box, every bag, every misplaced piece of Darlene's life, and placed them carefully outside. I lined them up neatly along the steps like offerings left out in the cold. No shouting, no confrontation, only silence, heavy and deliberate. If they wanted to play house, they could do it on the sidewalk. The air grew colder with every passing day, the kind of cold that didn't just bite at your skin but settled deep into your bones. I started double-checking every window latch, every lock, every crack under every door. My phone stayed glued to my hand, every vibration sending a jolt through my chest. Even the quiet felt wrong, like the house itself was holding its breath. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation. Late one afternoon, Marcy showed up without warning. She stood on my front porch, a bag of coffee and pastries in one hand, her brow creased with concern. I hadn't realized how tight my chest had been until I saw her. I let her in without a word. We barely made it through pleasantries before she noticed. Her gaze flicked to the toys stacked neatly by the hallway, the boxes labeled in bright marker, things that didn't belong. She didn't ask. She just looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't felt in weeks. Someone who saw me. Someone who believed me. "You're not crazy," she said quietly, setting the coffee down. "And you're not alone in this." For a moment, the icy pressure in my lungs eased. For the first time since this all began, I let myself breathe. But outside these walls, the attack had already started. It began with whispers at the coffee shop, the sideways glances at the grocery store. People I'd grown up waving to now barely met my eyes. It was Beverly's doing, I had no doubt. She had spun a story about me, a story of instability and poor judgment, painting me as a fragile woman clinging to things she couldn't handle. At first, I tried to shrug it off, but the looks stuck. They clung to me like smoke, staining everything I touched. One afternoon, while waiting in line for coffee, I heard them. 2 women, not bothering to lower their voices. "Such a shame about Maura," one said, shaking her head. "She's not well, you know. Poor thing." I left the coffee shop without ordering. The shame burned hotter than the anger. It seeped into my skin, wrapped around my throat. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel too tight. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I sank onto the front steps of my house, the cold seeping through my jeans, anchoring me to the earth. My fingers dug into the wood. Doubts clawed at the edges of my mind. Would anyone believe me now? Could I even win against a machine built on blood ties and lies? But somewhere beneath the hurt, a different fire caught. A fire that said, "Fight anyway." When Marcy came by again that evening, I didn't hesitate. I handed her copies of everything, the recordings, the photos, the notes. She didn't ask questions. She simply tucked them into her purse and squeezed my hand. When she left, I closed the front door softly, locking it with a click that echoed through the empty house. One by one, I slid fresh recording devices into place, each hidden more cleverly than the last. They thought isolating me would break me. They forgot what silence can build. The cold had settled deep into the bones of the town by now. Leafless trees lined the streets like silent sentinels, and every gust of wind rattled loose memories from the past few weeks. I moved through my days like a shadow, cautious and alert, documenting everything, saying little. Every nod from a neighbor felt strained. Every look lingered just a second too long. The rumors Beverly seeded were spreading like frost along the sidewalks, thin but sharp enough to cut. Still, I refused to bend. The message came one evening, tucked inside an envelope slid discreetly under my door. No return address, no note, just a scrap of paper bearing a single line of shaky handwriting. "They're trying to take everything. Be careful." I knew who had sent it. My cousin, distant enough to avoid being dragged into the mess, close enough to still remember the girl I used to be before life hardened the edges. According to the hurried note, Beverly was preparing to file for guardianship over me, painting me as incapable, unstable. It wasn't just social whispers now, it was legal. Cold rage pooled in my gut, curling tight and heavy. Gratitude tangled with bitterness in my throat. At least someone had the decency to warn me, even if they were too scared to stand beside me openly. 2 days later, Leonard showed up. He knocked like nothing had changed, stepping inside without waiting for permission, wiping his boots on my mat like he still had some claim over this place. "You know, Sweet Pea," he said, settling into my favorite chair like a king surveying his crumbling kingdom. "This house is too big for one person. Might do you some good to move back into that little camper for a while. Give yourself some breathing room." His voice was light, almost paternal, a joke on the surface. But underneath, the pressure was unmistakable. a reminder of where they thought I belonged. I smiled tightly, the kind of smile you wear when you know a storm is coming and you have no umbrella. I said nothing. Words, I realized, were wasted on people who had already decided who you were allowed to be. That night, after he left, I wandered through my home. I touched the walls I had painted myself, the window frames I had repaired, the floorboards I had cleaned until my knees ached. Every inch of this place held a memory, a piece of me they had never cared to see. I stood there in the living room, wrapped in the hush of winter, and made a silent vow. They would not take this from me, not this time. Before dawn, I packed everything I had recorded, every forged document, every shred of evidence, into neatly labeled folders. I drove to a bank across town and opened a safe deposit box under a new account. Inside that metal box, I placed my proof, my story, my armor. They thought I was soft because I stayed silent. They forgot silence can sharpen into a blade. The world outside had surrendered to winter's grip. I could see my breath when I stepped outside, the trees stripped bare like bones under the iron-gray sky. Inside my house, the silence was thick and heavy, not comforting anymore, but coiled like a rope around my throat. I moved through the rooms with careful precision, checking the locks, double-checking the hidden recorders, feeling the pressure build under my skin. The evidence was there, piled neatly in folders, copied onto encrypted drives, tucked safely away in places even I could barely remember. Every whisper, every lie, every violation recorded and waiting. They had drawn their lines. Now I was drawing mine. Leonard came around the next afternoon, a grin stretched across his weathered face. He leaned against the doorway, his hands shoved into his coat pockets, trying to look casual. "You know, Sweet Pea," he said, his voice syrupy and false, "I've been thinking, that camper of yours, maybe it's time we fixed it up. Give you a little more space, a fresh start." The words were light, almost kind, but underneath, the message was clear. Leave voluntarily or be forced. I smiled back just as sweetly, nodded like I was grateful. And in my mind, I checked off another weapon being sharpened against me. That evening, I decided to clean under the hallway table, a chore I'd been putting off for days. As I moved the table away from the wall, something metallic caught the light, a tiny black device tucked inside the vent, a camera. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. I stared at it, heart pounding in my ears, the room tilting slightly under the weight of violation. Keith. It had to be Keith. Or maybe all of them, working together, watching me, recording me. I pried the camera out carefully, turning it over in my hands. Rage burned slow and deep, leaving no room for panic. This wasn't just about stealing my home anymore. This was about erasing me, rewriting my life as something unworthy of keeping. I carried the device to the kitchen and set it down on the table next to the forged documents, the recordings, the photographs. A graveyard of broken trust. The old Maura, the one who hesitated, who gave second chances and softened at the first sign of regret, was gone. In her place stood someone colder, sharper. Before the sun rose, I uploaded every shred of evidence onto multiple encrypted drives. I made copies, labeling each one with dates and details. I gave a full set to Marcy, pressing the bundle into her hands with a steady grip, and a promise neither of us said out loud. They thought cornering me would make me beg. They forgot I don't kneel anymore. The air inside the house had grown heavier, thicker, almost too dense to breathe. Every creak of the floorboards, every soft knock against a window pane felt like a warning. I could feel the walls tightening around me, pressing me towards some inevitable collision. I no longer believed there was any safe corner left here. War was coming. I could hear it breathing just beyond the door. The first blow came from Keith. One morning, I woke to find my phone buzzing nonstop, notifications piling up faster than I could swipe them away. Snippets of video, carefully edited, conveniently cropped, had leaked into family group chats, passed like poisoned candy between distant relatives. Clips of me pacing late at night, muttering under my breath, staring too long at the window. Out of context, it looked bad. Exactly how they wanted it. Keith had taken the hidden surveillance footage and twisted it, feeding the lie that I was unstable, unfit. My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message. Some sent pity, others thinly veiled scorn. No one asked for my side. No one needed to. The battle had gone public. I told myself to stay calm, but calm cracked when I came home from work 2 days later. There were cars lining both sides of the street, music thumping from inside my house. Lights blazed from every window like beacons. I parked down the block, the pit in my stomach turning sour as I approached on foot. Laughter poured out onto the icy lawn. Strangers milled around my front porch, drinks in hand, plates of food balanced precariously. Someone had hung a makeshift banner across the entryway. "Home, sweet home, congratulations, Darlene and family." My heart went cold. I stepped inside and was met with a wave of heat and noise, and faces that didn't know me, didn't care. They laughed, they celebrated, they trampled across floors I had scrubbed with my own hands. And when they saw me standing there, they barely paused. They looked right through me like I was the intruder. I didn't scream, I didn't make a scene. I pulled out my phone and began recording. Faces, voices, hands lifting glasses in my living room, Darlene's smug grin as she posed for pictures in front of the fireplace, Beverly's satisfied smirk as she handed out slices of cake. Every detail, every betrayal. By the time the party began to thin out, and the last drunk guests stumbled into the night, I had hours of footage. I locked the door behind the final stranger, feeling the click of the deadbolt reverberate through my bones. I stood alone in the hollowed-out shell of my home, the stink of cheap beer and cigarette smoke clinging to the walls. They think they've won. They don't realize the war hasn't even started yet. The morning was cold enough to hurt, the kind of sharp, brittle cold that cut through the thickest coat and made the world feel abandoned. I sat up in bed before the sun had risen, the gray light outside barely illuminating the corners of my room. My body was heavy with exhaustion, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in months. Today, it would end. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the playback bar blinking against a paused video. Darlene's voice crackled through the speakers, sweet and venomous. "She doesn't even realize it yet," she laughed. "One stupid signature and she's out. It's practically done." My lips curved, not in amusement, but in satisfaction. They had buried themselves. I compiled the clip with the growing stack of evidence. The fake documents, the secret recordings, the footage of the party, every whisper and sideways glance captured in cold digital clarity. By mid-morning, Beverly arrived. She swept in with the chill, carrying a manila folder and that smile she wore like a mask. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, two players on opposite sides of a battlefield carved into linoleum and laminate. "I brought something to help," she said lightly, sliding the folder across to me. "Just to make things easier for you. Secure your future a little." I opened it carefully, like handling something toxic. The top page was titled Financial Aid Agreement. It looked innocuous enough, full of bland legal jargon and promises of support. But buried near the bottom, hidden in a paragraph dense enough to choke on, was the truth. Signing this would forfeit my ownership rights to the house. It wasn't a mistake. It was a knife, polished and sharpened, waiting for me to press the blade against my own throat. I closed the folder slowly and looked up at Beverly, whose smile faltered just enough to show the crack beneath it. "I have a counteroffer," I said quietly. I slid a stack of documents across the table, copies of the surveillance footage, the falsified paperwork, the party recordings, and the damning clip of Darlene's gloating confession. Beverly's face drained of color as she flipped through the evidence. "If you ever try this again," I continued, voice low and steady, "I'll make sure every neighbor, every judge, every last person you care about knows exactly what you've done." The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. "You wouldn't," she whispered. I smiled. "I already have copies secured. I already have people who know. This isn't a threat, it's a promise." She sat back heavily, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her things without another word. She left the folder behind on the table like a snake shedding its skin. I didn't watch her go. I simply stood, closing the door behind her with a quiet final click. They tried to erase me with ink and lies. I answered with truth and silence louder than any scream. A soft breeze whispered against the windows as I finally allowed myself to dream again. The house was quiet now, not the suffocating kind of quiet that had weighed on me for so long, but a soft, breathable kind. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the walls, feeling the absence where once there had been fear and invasion. The air smelled of fresh paint, and faintly of the new jasmine candle I had placed in the entryway. The walls, which had once echoed with foreign laughter and whispered betrayals, now stood silent, bearing witness only to my own small, steady steps toward peace. Word spread faster than I thought it would, maybe faster than Beverly and Darlene had ever anticipated. The evidence I had quietly delivered to the right hand spoke louder than any lie they could spin. I didn't hear from them again. No apologies, no explanations, just a void where their influence used to be. Friends who once kept their distance now offered stiff, awkward hellos. Some family members sent terse texts of support, carefully crafted not to pick sides. It didn't matter. I wasn't waiting for them to understand anymore. I stood by the front window one evening, watching the last remnants of snow melt into the thawing ground. I saw the garden patch I had cleared last fall, brown and bare now, but full of possibility. That weekend, I bought paint, bright yellows, warm grays, and new curtains, soft linen ones that let in the light. I planted tulip bulbs in the garden bed, my fingers numb from the cold, but my heart strangely warm. I patched the small crack in the living room ceiling myself, smoothing the plaster over like closing an old wound. The house became mine in ways a piece of paper never could have captured. Inside me, something else began to rebuild too. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped wondering if the next knock at the door would bring another war. It wasn't that I forgot what had happened. I would never forget. Betrayal leaves its fingerprints on the softest parts of you, but somehow, the space left by their absence made room for something else, something quieter and stronger. One evening, Marcy came by with a thermos of tea and 2 slices of pie from the diner. We sat on the porch wrapped in old blankets, sipping warmth against the bite of the lingering winter air. We didn't talk about Beverly or Darlene. We didn't need to. We talked about road trips, about maybe repainting the porch swing, about the little bookstore opening up downtown, about futures that, for once, didn't feel like battlegrounds. Some scars stay, but so do the lessons, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough to start again. Looking back, I realized that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice inside you that refuses to be erased, even when the world tries to rewrite your story. I learned that protecting your peace, your dignity, sometimes means standing alone, and that's not weakness. That's survival. That's courage. In life, we don't always get the apologies we deserve. We don't always get closure from the ones who hurt us, but we can choose to build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground against people you thought would always protect you? How did you find your way back to yourself? I would love to hear your story in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't like it, I still want to know why. Your honest thoughts matter to me. And don't forget, if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter we'll explore together. End of fan QA.